So Barks has always been my favorite root beer, even before I moved here to Mississippi, with IBC maybe being a close second. But once I learned Barks was invented here in Mississippi, I loved it even more. And this, obviously not Barks, it's been a long week. So there's a debate as to whether or not root beer originated here in Mississippi or if it was up in New Jersey, but I'd say regardless of where it was invented, Mississippi's the one that perfected it. It began as a sassafras tea, an herbal tea that was introduced by the Native Americans for medicinal purposes, and folks had recipes for it that they would pass down family to family. But the drink we've come to know and love didn't show up until the late 1800s in Biloxi, Mississippi. The story begins with a man named Edward Bark, who moved to Biloxi, Mississippi from New Orleans, where he had owned a lucrative bottling business. He and his brother had had some success there, bottling mineral waters, creating their own custom soft drinks, and their most popular beverage being an orange soda called Orangine. But once he moved to Biloxi, he began tinkering around with the recipe for his version of root beer, something that he called Barks Herb and Root Brew. And it was a huge hit. It had a slightly different flavor than other root beers at the time because he used a sarsaparilla base, there was less sugar involved, there was more carbonation, a lot more foam, and there was just a hint of caffeine and alcohol. Eventually, though, the recipe became known as Barks' famous old-time root beer, and that name was plastered and painted over trucks and buildings all over the South to let folks know where to find it. When they first started, Bark and his wife would sell bottles of the stuff by day, and then with the rest of the time they had, they would mix the ingredients for a new batch in their backyard. And from there, it grew exponentially. And not only did the drink practically sell itself, but the folks that were running the business made some really good decisions to avoid some pitfalls that would have sunk other businesses. During Prohibition, they dropped the word beer from their title and they removed that little trace of alcohol. That way they could avoid any legal problems and it gave the country something to drink instead of alcohol. During World War II, when sugar was being rationed, they instead just sold the syrup for their drink so that people could sweeten it at home. And another fun fact about the beverage, in 1990, Barks Root Beer was used to create the world's largest root beer float, using 1,500 gallons of Barks Root Beer, 1,000 gallons of ice cream, and an above-ground pool. An impressive feat, though maybe not all that appetizing. But all in all, just one more thing that the world would be missing if it wasn't for Mississippi.